In the last video, we were talking about what was going on with the colonists in England and how this war, the French and Indian War, they looked at it from two different perspectives, and it was really causing some conflict between them. And we looked at the Proclamation 1763, how after the war the king said, yeah, you fought in it, but now you can't move there. And now you also have to pay for this fighting. And so the king did the Stamp Act, he did the Sugar Act. And then to enforce the Proclamation 1763, he did the Quartering Act. So the colonists had to house and feed and take care of all the soldiers that enforced the proclamation that said that they couldn't move into the Ohio River Valley. Well, then the king imposes the Stamp Act. He repeals the Sugar Act and he imposes the Stamp Act. And now, this act was, in order, it required that colonists buy a special stamp. So you had to pay money for the official to stamp, to get the stamp on your products. And the stamps had to be placed on newspapers, wills, licenses. If you wanted to get married, you had to pay, not just for the license, but to have the stamp put on it. Insurance policy, land title, contracts, and other bill of sales. All these documents, once you created them or you did your business transaction, you had to pay another tax to have the stamp put on there. So now, how are the colonists feeling about this? They protest against the Sugar Act. The king rescinded it, but the king places the Stamp Act. Well, the colonists go crazy. They begin to protest. In Virginia, the House of Burgesses said only they have the legal right to tax Virginians. Other colonies follow their lead, and 9 colonies decide to protest. They petition the king, demanding you have to repeal this tax. The Sugar Act and Stamp Act. I misspoke before. He hadn't repealed the Sugar Act yet. And so now the king is getting all this pushback, and the king is a king. And you don't push back at the king. He's not feeling this. So what is the king's reaction to the colonies when they do that? The king makes a declaration. And he's like, well, let me tell you, colonies, I'm doing a declaratory act. And that means, let me tell you what that means. I, in Parliament, have total authority over you. You don't have the authority to say, I'm not doing it. You don't have the authority to protest and smuggle and do all these things to get around what Parliament says. So, but the crown was smart. The king was smart in a sense, because he was like, I'm going to let you know I'm the boss. And he knew that would really push the colonists over the edge. So he says, but I'll repeal those and I'll just enforce a new tax or a new act. So the crown wanted to tax the colonies in a way that wouldn't anger them. It wasn't helping the crown at all to have these colonists all jacked up and protesting. It was impacting, it was a nuisance, it was potentially dangerous. And so he said, okay, I will no longer tax products or activities in the colonies. I will only tax, so I won't tax the sugar, and I won't tax you getting a marriage license. I will only tax things that are imported. So you guys could live a happy life just using the things that you don't have to import, but if you get something imported, there will be a tax. So, and that was the Townshend Act. The Townshend Act set up a special system to enforce the new import duties. So these tax guys would be there at the ports, and as they're unloading the goods and he's looking at the ship's manifest, he's checking, and he is beginning to impose the tax. So they're out there in all these major cities and ports to help the customs official find illegal goods, to make sure they are not smuggling things in or sneaking things in to get away from paying the tax. In this new law, the custom officials had a legal ability called the writ of assistance. And this allowed the officers to search without saying what they were searching for. So if an officer saw things carried off a ship, brought into a warehouse, and he said, I wonder what's in there. He doesn't have to tell that person who owns those things anything. He has the automatic legal right to go in wherever that's at and go search it and see what's in there. Many colonists saw these writs and these searches as another violation of their rights. This is my property. You don't have the right. I have my own right to manage and take care of my property. You don't have the right to search or to seize my property. Seize means to take without legal authority. And so, like a warrant. And so they're saying, you have done this open law where these guys can do anything. They can search anything. They can enter my home and not tell me what they're looking for. And so now the colonists, it just creates more and more tensions. So, the colonists are starting to most definitely protest. And more, the colonists are going, you can't do this. Maybe we should, there were some colonists that were really talking about, maybe we should rethink our relationship with the king. He is not honoring the rights of these subjects. We have specific rights. And so more and more, the tensions are building. Parliament also takes another step. Because the New York Assembly refused to supply money, housing, and food for any soldiers, Parliament suspended the New York Assembly. So what that really means is the New York citizens had their representatives sent to their assembly, and their assembly was making decisions and laws on behalf of these New York citizens. Because the assembly decided, no, it is not our obligation, it is the government's obligation to feed and house the soldiers, not the citizens' obligation, we will not do that. And so Parliament said, all right, if you will not do that, then we're going to declare your assembly in New York as illegal and that it has no merit. And it doesn't mean anything. Well, the protests began to just really erupt with that. Because now the colonists are going, you are impacting our right for representation and self-government. And this is, you're pushing us even farther. So, the colonists really protest. It gets really crazy for the king. So the king's like, okay, maybe that wasn't the best tax. That was tax I thought I could do and not anger the colonists, but they're going nuts on me. So I'm going to repeal it because I can't deal with this angry situation. So he repeals all of those taxes, those duties in the Townshend Act, except for on one import. And the one import was tea. And the reason why the king left that on there is he goes, okay, you know, he's backed up with a couple of these taxes and rescinded them. But then the king, to kind of calm the colonists down, but then the king's going, but I'm the authority. I'm the absolute complete authority. And so to kind of prove, yeah, I still am the authority, he left that one tax on there. Just to say, yeah, I'll repeal them all except the one, because I'm still the guy who can do this. So what happens with that Townsend Act and the whole idea of the tea. Well, especially in Boston, tensions are huge. Boston was a major port, so people in Boston were seeing these tax collectors all in the port. They're walking by, they have British uniforms on, they are searching, they are violating, according to the colonists, their rights. And Boston was a city where there was just a lot of anger and animosity. Well, in one of the open areas in the city of Boston, there were some British soldiers, and they were standing there, and their orders were not to endanger or hurt fellow citizens. Remember, the colonists were citizens of Britain. But an angry crowd of workers and sailors surrounded this group of soldiers. And they started to yell at them, and they started to call them names. And as they started to do that, the soldiers tensed up. And the soldiers are wondering what to do. Well, they had no orders to shoot or do anything. And so then the crowd, one person starts yelling, another person goes, yeah, yeah, and they start yelling too. And then somebody gets worked up and they pick up some snow and they throw snow at it. And then somebody starts picking up garbage and throwing garbage, and then a rock. And these soldiers are standing there getting hit, with these objects, and they're nervous, and they don't know what this angry crowd is going to do next. And so their guns are in their hand, and finally, boom, the rifles go off. So the frightened soldiers fire into the crowd. They're afraid, and they wind up killing 5 and wounding 6. Well, now we've crossed a new line, that we have British citizens shooting and firing upon British citizens. This is not a war against another country. This is now citizen attacking citizen. And the anger in the colonies is even greater. One of the things that really produced a lot of anger there was that the trial for the soldiers, for the leadership of the soldiers, was held back in England. And so the Americans thought, this is wrong. It should be a trial and a jury of their peers where it happened, here in America. So the colonists were very, very unhappy with that. So now the leaders in the different colonies, and the ones that were really quite angry with the king and parliament, decided, we need to unite. Well, how do you unite people? It is through communication. Look at today with our social media. Somebody could put something on YouTube about an injustice, and it can get 1 million hits, and there's all of a sudden a whole groundswell of people who are supporting this. So it's communication and information that really unites people. And so, obviously no internet, electricity back then, but the colonial leaders knew that information needed to be shared. So they developed a committee of correspondence, and this committee wrote letters and pamphlets to inform people in the other colonies. There was no internet, there was no news. So if something happened in Boston, by the time the news traveled 2 or 3 days down to Georgia, and then the people of Georgia disseminate the information throughout that colony. So news didn't travel fast, so they had to be very deliberate on getting the news out there and creating pamphlets and creating things that talk about what their griefs were against the king. And this starts leading us, remember, to that one tax that was left in the Townsend Act. It was the tax on tea. And we'll see what happens with that in our next video.